Big banks face growing pressure resulting from the so-called LIBOR scandal. Besides a deepening global investigation and potential criminal charges from the U.S. government, big banks also face backlash from smaller banks. More and more small banks say that they're going to file suit claiming big banks have trampled them. LIBOR is the rate that major banks charge themselves for lending. Those interest rates could affect everything from your mortgage rate to your credit card, your student loan, money market funds, and even your pension fund. There are charges that London-based Barclays played a major role in manipulating the LIBOR rate to make big banks look better on paper and maximize their profits. The U.S. government is now investigating, and it is possible specific banks and specific employees could face criminal charges. Former New York Governor Elliot Spitzer says that this is a huge Wall Street scandal. He is among those who support a full investigation. Governor Spitzer, also host of Viewpoint on Current TV, joins me from New York tonight. Thanks for speaking with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me on.
So just tell me, how big of a deal is this?
This, in many respects, could be the biggest Wall Street scandal ever. Virtually every piece of debt, whether it's your auto loan, your home mortgage, your credit card debt, goes back to LIBOR. It's a bizarre little word. It sounds very British, and it is kind of British, but every interest rate that we have goes back to this. And if the banks were gaming this rate, they were manipulating perhaps the most important number in the financial markets. Many banks were involved. One has already acknowledged it. Many more are under investigation. Regulators are alleged to have known and done nothing. This goes right to the vortex of everything that is wrong with Wall Street.
There is an article, I was researching this a little bit today in Forbes. It's by Bill Fax. He downplays this. He says that the LIBOR may have been manipulated, but if it was, the rate actually went down. That ended up benefiting the average person. He also talks about, we're talking about fractions of fractions of fractions of percents. That being said, I think it goes to the heart of the integrity of the banking system. And I know when you're dealing with billions or trillions of dollars that fractions of fractions of fractions still is big money.
Well, let me put it this way. First, he has no idea whether the rate was pushed down or up. What we do know is that according to Barclays and the internal documents from Barclays, some days they pushed it down so they could pretend, for reasons that are too arcane to get into right now, that Barclays was stronger financially. Some days they moved it up so they could make more money by simply defrauding the market. It moved in both directions, and we don't know which way more or less, but they were playing games and committing fraud. Second, $800 trillion of debt is pegged to the LIBOR rate. And so therefore, if you move it 1%, you're dealing with right there $8 trillion. If you move it 1/10 of that, you can see the numbers are still absolutely enormous. And so this is big. And as you point out, it goes to the integrity of the most fundamental number in the capital markets, which is the rate that all debt is pegged to. Plus, as I alluded to before, the Fed is alleged to have known. One very serious inquiry is, what did the Fed do? The New York Fed in particular. Another inquiry, what did the Bank of England know? Because many of the banks, in fact, were doing this in London. And so all of these issues converge. Virtually everybody will have been affected by this. It could not be more important.
There are allegations that Timothy Geithner was concerned about the LIBOR being manipulated as early as 2008. Back then, he was with the New York Fed. He later becomes Secretary of Treasury, but as far as we know, nothing was said or done about it. So he acknowledged, perhaps in this email, allegedly, so he was aware of it to some extent, and yet nothing happened. What do you make of that?
Well, as I said, I don't want to jump to conclusions about the New York Fed, although perhaps some would say I already have. I'm very skeptical that the Fed did what needed to be done. The Fed has been very, very close to the banks, way too close to the banks. Structurally, we should never forget, presidents, CEOs of the banks sit on the board of the New York Fed. Therefore, it's no surprise the Fed didn't do what it probably should have done here. You're absolutely correct. Tim Geithner sent an email to the Bank of England saying, here's some ideas about improving it, but nothing really happened. Nobody said, stop this illegal behavior, investigate to see who's committing a crime. The sorts of things that should have been done if you were seeing ongoing criminality simply were not done. And so, again, without prejudging, we have a lot of investigation to do. Somebody needs to take a hard look at whether the New York Fed was either covering for the banks, raising an issue without doing anything, or perhaps, and I don't think this is the case, being an inquisitive, tough prosecutor as it should have been? We need to answer that question, and this goes right again to the heart of whether the New York Fed, which has been at the center of so many of these financial crises and financial scandals, whether the Fed properly understood its role as a regulator rather than the buddy, the friend, and the bank for the banks.
You touched on how many different rates the LIBOR affects, but there are a growing number of states who says this also impacts their pension plan. California is looking into it. As far as we know right now, they have not taken any legal action. Some states say they will. Talk about what's at stake there.
I think every municipality, every state that has debt that is pegged to LIBOR is going to say, we want a recovery. You guys were playing games with the rate. We don't know yet, and I think this is why calculating the damages may be hard. We don't know if it went up, went down, went sideways, but everything is pegged to LIBOR, and as a consequence, when the Barclays or UBS or the RBS, the Royal Bank of Scotland, begin to play games with it, somebody is paying the price for their desire to game the system. Who is that person? Municipalities, states, pension plans, everybody out there is going to have a claim. It is going to take a long time to sort out, and the numbers will be big. That is what we know now. To be more specific, we're just going to have to poke at this and investigate in due course.
All right, let's turn to another subject real quickly. Another new development. Capital One, one of the nation's biggest banks and lenders, agreeing to pay $210 million in fines. That's stemming from misleading practices from outside call centers. Are we making headway in cleaning up Wall Street? Do these issues show that it's coming to light and we're making progress? Or does it highlight how much corruption there was and still is?
Unfortunately, I'm more in the second category. I think it's beginning to make the case once again that whenever you pick up a rock, you find something ugly hiding underneath it when it comes to the capital markets. There's simply been such a dearth of prosecution, enforcement, and real regulatory authority over the past 10, 15, 20 years that when you poke and look, you see ugly stuff. Now, the good news out of this is it's beginning to demonstrate that the Consumer Protection Bureau, this is, I believe, the first enforcement action from the new Consumer Protection Bureau created in the Dodd-Frank legislation. So I think people can see there was some good that came out, in my view, a lot of good that came out of that bill, not enough perhaps, but this is putting that agency on the map, saying to the banks, the Consumer Protection Agency will do what it needs to do, begin to flex its muscles. We all know that in credit card marketing, there have been games played over the years. This is the first of what I imagine will be many such cases to be brought.
Governor Spitzer, thank you for your time tonight. I know you're in the midst of preparing for your show Viewpoint on Current Television, but we thank you for taking a little bit of time to sort through this. It, as you mentioned, going to be something that's going to be ongoing for a long time.
Thank you for having me on tonight. Appreciate it.